Well, you can see why I chose these four to speak for me today. Four dearest friends. You were all wonderful. John, Bob, beloved Rabbi friend, and Jerry. Thank you so very much. Anyone who's lived as long as Gail and I have now can look back at our lives and say how different they would have been if we had turned left instead of right, if we'd been somewhere an hour earlier or an hour later. And those kinds of circumstances, strangely enough, brought us to Tulsa. When I went to First Methodist Church in Houston, Dr. Charles Allen said, "I can't hit the ball for you, but I can put you up to bat." He believed that we had a chance to build that Sunday night service if I were allowed to get before that city. And he got me invitations. Lions, Rotary, Kiwanis, business and professional women, you name it, I've spoken to them. Bob's right. I had about 4 speeches, and I could give any one of them at 3 in the morning. Just shake me, I could give them. But I gave a Rotary speech one time. And lo and behold, there was a Rotarian there who was on his way up. He became vice president of Rotary International, asked me to speak at a district conference in College Station, Texas. I spoke, and lo and behold, there was a director of Rotary International there who invited me to speak at a Zone Institute in New Orleans a few months later. I flew to New Orleans and spoke. A few days later, I got a call from Bishop Paul Galloway, who was bishop in Arkansas. I didn't know him. He didn't know me. He asked me if I would come to Arkansas the next spring and speak to all the Rotarians of that state. I said, of course, absolutely. I hung up the phone, and in a few minutes my phone rang, and a man said, "I'm the superintendent of schools in Stuttgart, Arkansas. I've done a mean thing to you. I heard you speak in New Orleans. I wanted you to speak to all the Rotarians of Arkansas. I was afraid if I asked you to come, you wouldn't. So I asked my bishop to call you." And then he said, "But I have another motive. I want my bishop to know somebody like you. So I've asked him to meet your plane in Little Rock, drive you down to Hot Springs to the convention center, introduce you to all the Rotarians of the state of Arkansas, and then drive you back to the airport." I said, "You don't understand. Bishops don't meet my plane. I meet their planes. I carry their luggage. I do whatever they ask of me." He said he would. So I flew into Arkansas, very apprehensive about this whole thing. I could just see this bishop I did not know standing there with smoke coming out his ears, that he was wasting a whole day on me. But of course you knew Paul Galloway. He had been your beloved pastor for 10 years. He drove me to Hot Springs. He stood up and introduced me as the most outstanding young Methodist preacher in America, and he had never even heard me. And when I got through, he drove me back to the airport in Little Rock, and on the way he said, "How long have you been an associate?" I said, 9 years. "Well, it's time for you to have your own church. You go back to Houston, and you tell your bishop that I said, bow his neck and put you in a top church." His words. Well, I don't tell bishops what to do. Even now, I don't tell bishops what to do. So I flew home and went on with my work. Strangely enough, 2 years later, my bishop in Texas was playing golf at a Council of Bishops meeting, suffered a tragic heart attack, and died. Bishop Paul Galloway had retired by this time, but he was the youngest retired bishop in this 10-state area, and he was asked by the College of Bishops to come out of retirement and become the bishop in Houston, Texas. Had a big reception for him and Mrs. Galloway, and Gail and I went. We started down this receiving line, and when I got to him, I said, "Bishop, Muzon Biggs. And I could see the wheels turning, but nothing registering. And I said, you know, you met me at the airport in Little Rock. Oh, yeah, sure. And I said, you remember what you said to me that day? He said, I don't remember. And I said, you said that my bishop ought to bow his neck and put me in a top church, and God has sent you here to take care of that. He smiled and said, we'll see. 4 months later, I got a call one morning early when I was shaving and was told, you're going to be the pastor at Trinity Methodist Church in Beaumont, Texas. And when I called to tell him how grateful I was, he said, well, let me explain this to you. There are 12 district superintendents. 11 of them voted against you because you're too young. And I told them, I'm sending him to Beaumont. Now, you get over there and show these district superintendents I know what I'm doing. And here's the kicker. If you do it well for 7 or 8 years, your next stop could be Boston Avenue, Tulsa. That's the first time I'd ever heard my name mentioned with yours, ever. But I knew he was going to have to retire again in a couple of years, which he did. He went back to Little Rock. And my new bishop was Finus Crutchfield. He became my bishop. He never mentioned you to me in 4 years. And then suddenly one day, he was in my church in Beaumont, came into my office, propped his feet up on my desk and said, I think John Russell's about to be elected a bishop. And if he is, I'd like to nominate you to go to Boston Avenue in Tulsa. I don't know if I can sell you to Bishop Milhouse or not, but Paul Galloway and I have been talking about this, and we think you would be a match with them. Then he said, it's too great a church for you to turn them down. So you tell me now, if I can get him to invite you to come, will you go? He said, we had an 11-year pastorate there, a 10-year pastorate, a 12-year pastorate. Now they've had 2 in a row, only 4 years. They need somebody who will stay a long time. If I can get him to invite you, will you go, and will you stay a long time? And I said, I want to talk to Gail about this. He said, sure. And so the next day I called him. Gail always says, whatever you think you're supposed to do. I thought I was right. I said, if you can get me in, I will go and stay a long time. I didn't know you. You didn't know me. I'd never seen your church. We were on vacation in Honolulu when we got that call from Bishop Milhouse. He was an old German who had been a bishop in the Evangelical United Brethren Church. When we joined them in 1968, he became a bishop in the United Methodist Church, and his old school ways were that bishops really bished, and everybody else just did whatever they said. So I'd been warned by Bishop Crutchfield, don't ask him about the salary, it'll turn him off. Don't ask him if they have a parsonage or a housing, it'll turn him off. If you want to go, just say yes. And the conversation was very brief. Dr. Biggs, I've met today with the cabinet and the Pastor Parish Relations Committee of Boston Avenue Church in Tulsa, and I'd like to invite you to be the pastor of that church. Will you accept this appointment? And I said, I will. He said, then let me explain this to you. Bishop Russell is having receptions and dinners and parties, and I don't want you in the way. So if I hear that you've crossed the Red River before this moving date I'm about to give you, I will nullify this appointment. Are we clear about that? I said, we're clear. He said, okay, I don't want them to see you till you walk in that pulpit, and I don't want you to see them either. And I said, okay. So we had a month to wait, and then the moving day. Gail and I loaded 3 little children into 2 cars, drove over 500 miles, got here just after dark, stopped at a service station to ask, could you tell us how to find Boston Avenue Methodist Church? And they told us. It was a Thursday night in August, and the church was locked up tight. All the way around, we couldn't get in. It wasn't lighted on the outside back then. It was dark. I had a phone number. I called the chair of the board, and Carl Leonard asked, where are you? We were at some other service station, and he directed us how to get to the parsonage. And we drove. He was waiting in the driveway. He unlocked the door, and we went in and slept. And that's how we came to you. And you didn't see me, and I didn't see you till I walked into this pulpit. 10 years ago, I got a letter from the Board of Pensions. And they said, you started so young, you now have all the years required to retire. You could retire this year. And I shredded their letter. And the next year they wrote me again. And the next year they wrote me again. And the next year they wrote to me again. But I loved what I was doing. I loved it. I loved it. And you were so wonderful to me to get to stand up at 8:30 behind this wonderful chapel choir every week, and to stand up at 11 behind this big chancel choir every week, to work with my team whom we had gathered over the years. This morning I gave Eva Marie a hug back at the back, and I said, you're the best. You're the best at what you do. But I feel they all are the best at what they do. That's why we have them here at Boston Avenue, because I've felt they're the best that I could find. And it's been a privilege to serve them, and you with them. We're truly grateful. It's been wonderful, and we thank you so very much.